Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com joins me from the nation's capital, WMAL, my affiliate in the nation's capital. Gordon, a month ago, just about, the President of the United States met Xi Jinping, the boss of the Chinese Communist Party, in California. That conversation didn't go anywhere, to my knowledge, because it was overrun with the news of Edward Snowden. But now I learn from news releases that within these next days, the United States Secretary of State John Kerry and the Treasury Secretary Jack Lew will be meeting with their Chinese equivalents for a conversation along with 14 U.S. government agencies and 16 Chinese state bodies led by the leadership there, a conversation about the two states working together. Is this a follow-on to the conversation between the presidents in California?
Yes, it is, John. And the conversation in California was a follow-on to so many discussions that the Obama administration has had with China, all of them fruitless. Fruitless.
And yet the conversations go forward. So let's be discerning about what is going to be said, what could be said. Stephen Yates, the CEO of DC International Advisory, former advisor to Vice President Cheney, joins us. Stephen, a very good evening to you. Right now, the U.S.-China strategic and economic dialogue looks positive. These two trading partners are trading rivals. The issues, however, include cybersecurity. Not much was said of substance after the two presidents met. I put that down to the fact that Edward Snowden had crowded the calendar, and questions about the NSA spying on everyone made it embarrassing for perhaps the president to press the issue of cyber spying and cyber terror and cyber sabotage on Xi Jinping. But do you believe that will now be front and center of this new dialogue, that the Chinese are stealing, thieving, spying aggressively all the time, and we don't seem to be able to stop them? Good evening to you, Stephen.
Good evening, John and Gordon. I do think that the topic is certainly being addressed better this time around. This is the fifth time in the newly minted version of our dialogue at the cabinet level with China. It's supposed to follow through and make progress after presidents meet. The administration this time opened with Joe Biden having a statement that tried to make clear that there is a distinction that every government recognizes between the espionage that all engage in and the act of sabotaging other people's systems and commercial espionage. I don't know that the Chinese cared very much about the distinction. There hasn't been any very indication that they are willing to bend or adapt. And so they seem to be taking the comments in stride and moving on to the next talking points.
Gordon?
Stephen, the Chinese have this concept of doing more by doing less. It's sort of very Taoist. It seems to me that, we have all of these dialogues with the Chinese, 90 of them in the Obama administration, which is more than the 50 of them in the Bush administration. I couldn't believe it. I thought 50 was enormous. Now we've got up to 90. The question is, are we trying too hard? Are we actually sort of putting too much effort into this and therefore feeding the Chinese already inflated notions of their self-importance?
I think there's an enormous risk of exactly that going on. Of course, it's just like dealing with any other counterpart. If you just focus on the number of times you meet, and if your leaders are just so happy to have had the meetings, the other side feels no motivation whatsoever to give in. They've got tough decisions to make on their end. I don't necessarily have sympathy for the legitimacy of the Chinese government, but they have their own issues to take care of, and it's their job to do it, and they're tough at it. Ours seem to be happy to just show up and release their talking points and press statements and move on to the next meeting. It just happens way, way too much. We've also vastly expanded the number of people attending the meeting, and I think there is a truism in Washington that when the number of people in a meeting increases, the level of substance declines dramatically.
Stephen, there are other issues of conflict or potential conflict. Gordon and I earlier this evening spoke of the Senkakus. That's one of the issues of Chinese aggression in the whole of Asia. Is it in the United States to be aggressive about this, to make the Chinese uncomfortable about their provocations?
Well, we owe it at the very least to our allies, and I would like to think we owe it to ourselves, having sacrificed no small amount to try to help facilitate a peaceful century of development in the Pacific. We've played no small role in that. But at the very least, we owe it to our allies to stand with them against encroachment. And the Chinese have no business messing around in this when they have plenty of troubles within their own borders. And we need to be very clear that any adventurism would be met with strength. I don't think that's the signal they're getting, though.
Gordon?
Stephen, you talked about adventurism of the Chinese. It seems to me that part of the problem right now is that not only are the Chinese arrogant, but also we've got disarray in the Chinese political system, where we have a military which is very assertive, civilians who seem to be taking their cues from the flag officers. We got political dissension. The leadership transition of last year hasn't healed. And so therefore it's very difficult for any Chinese leader, Xi Jinping or whoever, to be able to really speak for China, as we say. So the question is, perhaps right now China is not in a position to be able to deal with the international community in good faith. How do you see this?
Well, I think that's a very real calculation we have to have. The history of U.S.-China relations is littered with examples of times when one side is more ready than the other to move forward, or one side is mired in domestic conflict or other issues. And there are rare moments where both sides might actually have a common purpose and are prepared to move forward. But those are few. And right now, I just don't see the Chinese in a very good position. That's one of the things you have to question about whether it makes sense to have these gigantic meetings very early in the tenure of a newly forming government in China, or should we maybe just get back to scheduling summits when we have a real agenda and both sides are committing to take action on it?
Climate change is another issue said to be part of the economic conversation between the two states. What are they talking about, Stephen? There is no consensus about climate change legislation in this country. It hasn't happened in the first term of the Obama administration. There was no prospect in the second term. Do they all get around and share politically correct thoughts and then do nothing?
I think that's exactly the formula. You've cracked the code. There's also, I think in the minds of Chinese leaders, I don't think they see a climate change problem. They see a pollution problem. And they are open to collaboration that would offer technical assistance to deal with pollution. But there was a colossal diplomatic failure of imagining that we had worldwide consensus to move on this issue in 2009 at Copenhagen. And China stood firm then, and I don't see how Xi Jinping would perform any differently than his predecessor now.
Gordon, it occurs to me, to be ironic here, that it's not just the Chinese who are puffed up by these meetings and given a sense of self-importance. That would attend to these American officials as well, wouldn't it, Gordon?
Well, to a certain extent, I guess that's right. I've been, in Washington for the last couple of days. You can't go for more than 10 minutes without this enormous parade of D.C. police cars, black SUVs, motorcycle police, all just sort of clogging up the streets. And so you can imagine that people like Joe Biden and Jack Lew and John Kerry just love being ferried around these Washington streets in these screaming caravans that pull everyone off to the side. It just seems to me that's probably, you've got it right, John.
Stephen, just 30 seconds here. I'm going to be a little suspect because you were in the Bush administration. Did you suffer with these meetings? Was it painful to go through these exercises with what, after all, are a gang of stooges who work for dictators?
It is painful. I think every administration owes it to ourselves to give it a try. But, once, twice, 3 times burned, I think you need to grow up and move on with a different approach. But I think we tried to reach out to Hu Jintao when he was a new leader. I thought that was a worthwhile effort. I think we learned from it, and the Obama administration is trying to reinvent the wheel.
Stephen Yates. Stephen Yates is the CEO of DC International Advisory. He was in the Bush administration working for the Vice President. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com. Good luck, Washington, D.C. I'm John Batchelor.